The moment I bought the lake, I knew it would ruffle some feathers. What I didn't expect was for the Homeowners Association of Willow Ridge Subdivision to show up at my gate 2 days later, led by a bleach blonde, overconfident woman wearing a sun hat big enough to block out the truth. Her name. Cheryl. Of course it was. I was out by the dock, checking the water line when I heard the unmistakable sound of entitled footsteps' heels snapping against the gravel like the HOA gods themselves had sent someone to bless me with nonsense. "You must be the new owner," Cheryl announced, arms crossed like she was posing for a mugshot. Behind her were 2 other HOA board members, one holding a clipboard, the other looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I am," I said, standing up. "Name's Adrian Zeller." "Well, Adrian," she said with a forced smile, "we're here to discuss public access. This lake is a shared amenity for our residents and we'll need to schedule maintenance and install signage." I blinked. "Public access?" "Yes," Cheryl chirped. "This lake borders the rear of Willow Ridge. It's always been considered part of the community. Our bylaws let me stop you right there," I said, walking over to my truck. I opened the glove box and pulled out the copy of the deed, still crisp from the county clerk's office. I handed it to her. "You might want to read that before you start installing signs on my land." She skimmed it, her smile fading faster than a popsicle in August. "This can't be right," she muttered. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake. I bought it from the previous owner fair and square. It's private property now. Not part of your subdivision, not owned by your HOA, and definitely not an amenity." Cheryl's face tightened. "We've had residents using that lake for years. They fish, paddleboard, some even host holiday events, and now," I said, folding my arms, "they're trespassing. You can't just cut off access like that." "I absolutely can, and I will." She sucked in a breath so dramatic I thought she might faint from oxygen loss. "We'll see about that. The HOA has rights." I didn't say anything. I just took the deed back and walked toward my dock. The sound of her heels storming away was the only music I needed. The next morning, I found a laminated sign zip-tied to my gate. "Notice: Common Area Maintenance by HOA Public Access mandated." It had the Willow Ridge HOA logo plastered right on top. I laughed out loud. I took it down, called my lawyer, then installed 2 motion-activated trail cameras, one facing the lake, the other watching the pathway from the subdivision. I had a feeling this was just the beginning, and I was right. By the 3rd morning, I had a full flash drive of HOA board members wandering onto my property like they owned the place. One even had the gall to paddle out in a kayak, waving at my camera like he was on a guided tour. I didn't confront them, not yet. What I needed was a pattern, not a confrontation. And patience was something I had in spades. That evening, I drove to the County Planning Commission. I didn't need permission to enforce my rights, but I wanted to make sure there were no easements or weird zoning quirks that Cheryl might dig up and wave around like a magic wand. The clerk, a sharp guy named Marvin, helped me pull the subdivision's original development plans. "Looks like the lake was never part of their plat," Marvin said, tapping the map with a pencil. "The property line ends about 15 feet from the water. No community easement, no shared access, and no mention of it in their infrastructure filings." "Mind printing that for me?" He slid the copy across the counter. "You expecting trouble? Already in it." By the end of the week, things escalated. I came home from work to find an orange plastic fence stretched across my property line, with a handmade sign reading, "HOA Event Area Temporarily Closed for Improvements." Tables were being set up, and 2 guys in matching polo shirts were hammering stakes into the ground like they were building a circus tent. I parked, walked straight up to the nearest one, and asked, "Who gave you permission to be here?" "Cheryl," he said without looking up. "She said this was common ground, something about the bylaws." I pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and began filming. "All right," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm asking you both to leave private property. You've got 5 minutes. After that, I call the sheriff." He looked up then, uncertainty creeping into his face. We're just following orders. Then follow the next one, pack up and leave. They hesitated, but when I started dialing, they scattered faster than leaves in a storm. I took video of everything: the sign, the fence, even the tire tracks leading back to the subdivision. That night, I emailed everything to my attorney and filed a trespassing report with the county sheriff. I wasn't bluffing anymore. Still, Cheryl wasn't the type to back down after a warning. She was the type who doubled down. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a fabricated notice of violation claiming I was obstructing community access to a designated recreation area and threatening daily fines of $200 until compliance was achieved. It was printed on HOA letterhead and signed by all 5 board members. The problem: they had absolutely no jurisdiction over my property. None. I took the letter straight to my attorney, a seasoned real estate litigator named Laura Mendel, who had dealt with more overreaching HOAs than she could count. "This is fraud," she said, flipping through the pages. "They created a fake violation for land they don't govern and threatened financial penalties under false pretenses. That's a felony in this state. They just handed you a gift. We drafted a cease and desist letter, citing specific statutes about impersonating authority and attempted extortion." Laura also recommended we file a complaint with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs and the county prosecutor's office. We submitted everything: videos, photos, the letter, and a timeline of events. By the following week, the sheriff's department launched an investigation. Deputy Unearthing came by to take a formal statement. He'd already spoken with Cheryl, who apparently claimed it was all a misunderstanding. "You'd be surprised how often these things happen," he said, voice low as he wrote in his notepad. "HOAs get used to pushing people around. Then they meet someone who knows the law. Do they usually commit mail fraud in the process?" He chuckled. "That part's new." The very next weekend, I hosted a barbecue, not to celebrate yet, but to meet the people whose HOA had been scheming behind their backs. I sent open invitations to every house that bordered the lake, clearly stating that it was on my property and that I was extending temporary courtesy access for the event. Nothing fancy. Just burgers, music, and a chance to tell my side of the story. About 30 people showed up. And within an hour, I realized most of them had no idea what the HOA had been doing in their name. "We were told the lake was always part of the subdivision," said a man named Don, a retired firefighter who lived 2 doors down from the fence line. "They told us it was common land when we bought the house." "It never was," I said. "I've got the county maps to prove it, and I've already filed a complaint with the state. You all might want to think about what else they've been lying about." That got their attention. One woman, a nurse named Felicia, looked toward the water and said, "They tried to fine me last year for having unauthorized guests fishing. Those guests were my nephews. I thought they were bluffing but paid it anyway." "Ask for your money back," I said. "And ask for proof of the rule they cited." By sunset, several residents were openly discussing a recall vote. I offered them copies of the maps and directed them to the county records office. I didn't push anything, just gave them facts. The rest took care of itself. The next morning, Cheryl showed up again. This time, she parked on the street and marched up with a face full of forced civility. "We need to have a conversation," she said. I motioned toward the camera mounted on the edge of my porch. Already recording, her posture stiffened. "There's been a misunderstanding. The board didn't mean to imply ownership. We were just concerned about access." "Is that why you sent a fake violation notice with daily fines?" She looked away briefly. "The language may have been overzealous. Try fraudulent. I'm trying to resolve this amicably. You had your chance. Now it's between you and the county." She exhaled through her nose. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. You've got that backwards." She left without another word. That afternoon, Deputy Unearthing called with an update. The district attorney's office was reviewing the case. While criminal charges were still under consideration, a civil suit was now officially in motion. Laura filed the paperwork for defamation, trespass, and attempted extortion. The HOA would be served within the week. The fallout hit faster than I expected. 3 board members resigned within days of being served. Cheryl tried to rally support but found herself isolated. Turns out, the residents didn't appreciate being dragged into a legal mess over something they never authorized. A petition for a special election to dissolve the current board reached the required signatures in 48 hours. Still, I wasn't celebrating yet. Cheryl wasn't the type to walk away clean. And something told me she had one more card to play. I just hoped it wasn't as stupid as the last one. By the time the process server handed Cheryl the lawsuit in front of her manicured flower beds, word had already swept through Willow Ridge like a summer thunderstorm. Residents weren't just gossiping anymore, they were organizing. A recall vote was scheduled, and the HOA's legal budget, which had once been robust thanks to years of arbitrary fines, was now frozen pending an emergency audit. I stayed out of it publicly. Let the neighborhood handle their own reckoning. My part, at least for now, was proving ownership and protecting my land. But the deeper my attorney and I dug, the more rot we uncovered. Laura's paralegal found something odd while reviewing the HOA's financial filings entries labeled environmental partnership dues, paid out quarterly to a shell company with no listed contact information. When she traced it back, it led to a PO. Box registered under the name of Cheryl's cousin, a man who didn't even live in the state. The payments totaled over $40,000 across the last 3 years. I took the file straight to Deputy Unearthing. He didn't blink. "This is enough to move forward," he said, flipping through the bank transfer records. "If those funds were collected from residents under false pretenses, we're looking at wire fraud and embezzlement." He handed the documents to one of the detectives seated nearby. They'd already been quietly interviewing former board members, and one of them, Mark Langley, the guy with the clipboard who'd first come to my property, had flipped. According to Unearthing, Mark had turned over internal memos showing Cheryl had been pushing to reclassify the lake as a natural HOA asset for years, even though she knew it had never been part of the original development plans. She tried to get the previous owner to sign a joint use agreement last year, but he refused, Unearthing told me. That's why she never pushed this sooner. She waited until it changed hands, then hoped she could bluff her way into control. It was more than bluffing now. It was criminal. A week later, Cheryl was arrested for fraud, falsifying public documents, and misappropriation of HOA funds. The sheriff's office raided her home and the HOA office inside the clubhouse. Boxes of records were hauled out, and residents stood on their porches watching the scene unfold like it was a neighborhood parade. I stayed on my porch sipping coffee. 2 days after the arrest, I found a handwritten note slipped under my front gate. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the penmanship from the fake violation letter, the same loopy, aggressive script Cheryl had used when she tried to fine me for access obstruction. This one read, "You'll regret this. Enjoy your lake while it lasts." I handed it to Unearthing. He took it without a word and added it to the growing case file. He didn't seem surprised. Apparently, Cheryl had left similar notes on the windshields of 2 former board members who refused to back her plays. Meanwhile, the special election to replace the HOA board moved forward. Don, the retired firefighter, and Felicia, the nurse, were both on the candidate list. They weren't running on promises, they were running on facts. Their campaign flyers included copies of the original subdivision plats, photos of the fake signage, and a one-line slogan, "We live here." We deserve better. The election turnout shattered previous records. Cheryl's remaining allies barely mustered a dozen votes between them. By the end of the day, the board was flipped, the bylaws were under review, and the new leadership voted unanimously to audit every financial decision made in the last 5 years. But just when I thought the storm had passed, the weather turned. Late one night, I was reviewing the latest drone footage of my property. I'd started flying a small drone twice a week, mostly to keep an eye on shoreline erosion and to track any uninvited guests. What I saw made my stomach drop. A section of the tree line near the northern edge of the lake, about 20 feet into my property, had been cleared. Not just trimmed, bulldozed. Several mature oaks gone, replaced by a rough gravel path leading directly from the subdivision's walking trail to my shoreline. I grabbed a flashlight and hiked out there. Sure enough, fresh tire tracks, a wheelbarrow, a pile of landscaping bricks half buried under a tarp. Someone had started building a patio. The next morning, I filed a police report and had Laura draft an emergency injunction. The new board was cooperative. They hadn't authorized any work, and after some internal calls, it became clear that none of the contractors hired by the HOA had done it. That left one possibility: Cheryl. She may have been awaiting trial, but she still had keys to a lot of things, including the HOA's old landscaping storage shed. Sure enough, when the sheriff's office got a warrant to search it, they found invoices for rented equipment under a forged name. The address listed, the same P.O. box linked to the fake environmental nonprofit. It was a desperate move. A last attempt to create established use before her legal fate was sealed, but it backfired spectacularly. The new charges stacked higher: destruction of protected woodland, trespassing with intent to alter private property, and attempted land conversion through force of use. I had to secure the area with fencing and hired a surveyor to restake the line. But the real victory came when Felicia handed me a letter signed by every member of the newly elected HOA board. It stated, in clear legal terms, that Willow Ridge Subdivision recognized the lake as private property, disavowed all previous attempts to claim it, and vowed not to contest its ownership in any future proceedings. It was notarized, filed with the county, and included in the state's case against Cheryl as evidence that her actions were not sanctioned by the community. I framed it in my office. The lake, once treated like a convenience by people who never owned it, had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that power doesn't come from a title or a clipboard. It comes from truth, proof, and the refusal to be bullied. A month later, Cheryl accepted a plea deal. No trial. No press conference. Just a quiet sentencing in a small courtroom. She got 5 years probation, restitution payments to the HOA, and a lifetime ban from serving on any board incorporated under state HOA law. The community didn't celebrate. They rebuilt. The walking trail was rerouted, the falsified fines were refunded, and a new transparency portal was launched so every resident could see where their dues were going. Don and Felicia kept their promises not through grand speeches, but by showing up, listening, and doing the work. As for me, I built a small boathouse on the north end of the lake. Nothing fancy. Just enough space for a canoe and a quiet chair by the window. A place to sit with a cup of black coffee and watch the water move the way it always had, unbothered, unclaimed, and absolutely mine. The lake was quiet again. No uninvited guests, no plastic fences or bogus notices. Just the sound of cicadas humming in the trees and the occasional splash of bass breaking the surface. But even with Cheryl gone and the new board in place, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unfinished still lingered beneath it all. I wasn't wrong. 2 months after the new board took over, Felicia called me one evening. She'd been going through archived HOA records, documents the old board had stuffed in a locked cabinet that no one had touched for years. There was a file labeled Auxiliary Projects, and inside it were receipts, contractor logs, and inspection summaries that didn't match any known community upgrades. One item caught her attention: a payment for soil remediation along the northern tree line on my land, dated a full year before I bought the property. It had been signed off using my lake's parcel number. I met her at the new board's office the next day. It was a modest space now, no more luxury coffee machines or leased subs. Just folding chairs, paperwork, and people trying to clean up years of deception. Felicia handed me the file. They used your parcel number to apply for state conservation funds, she said. This was before you bought the property, but they didn't own the land then either. The original owner never signed anything. The grant application had been submitted under the name of the Willow Ridge Environmental Committee, a subentity that didn't legally exist. It had received nearly $30,000 in state funds for shoreline conservation, and the paperwork had been processed using a forged signature from a man who, according to the county's death records, had died 2 years prior. I took the file straight to Laura. Her face darkened as she read through the pages. "This goes beyond HOA misconduct," she said, pulling out her tablet. "This is grant fraud, identity falsification, and misuse of public funds. And if they used a dead man's signature, we're looking at felony charges that could go federal." By the end of the week, the State Department of Natural Resources had launched an investigation. A forensic handwriting analyst confirmed the signature had been forged. The original application had been submitted electronically, but the uploaded document bore a falsified notary stamp from an office that had closed 6 years earlier. The state issued subpoenas for all HOA financials dating back 7 years. The new board cooperated fully. They even hired an independent auditor to help untangle what Cheryl and her allies had buried. The deeper they looked, the worse it got. Turns out the environmental partnership dues weren't just going to a shell company. They were being funneled through a chain of fake trusts, then withdrawn in cash by someone using a prepaid cell phone and a driver's license under the name J. Winters, a name that didn't appear on any property records or board rosters, but showed up on half a dozen receipts tied to equipment rentals and supply vendors. The sheriff's office looped in the state attorney general. The AG's office sent a special investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana, who used to handle organized fraud cases. She spent 3 hours at my boathouse going over the documents I'd collected from the initial trespassing incident all the way through the fake construction site. "They built a paper HOA within a real one," she said, flipping through a binder of forged invoices. "They used the real board as a cover while a few of them siphoned money in the background. And when they needed more, they tried to expand their assets your lake so they could justify bigger budgets and access new grants." She paused when she reached the photos of the bulldozed trees. "This was them trying to create a footprint," she said. "If they could get enough infrastructure in place, paths, benches, signs, they'd argue it had been community-maintained land all along. It wouldn't have stood in court, but they were counting on you folding before it reached that point." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and handed her the drone footage of the path being built. A month later, the grand jury handed down indictments. Cheryl was hit with additional charges, 3 felonies, including wire fraud and falsifying state records. 2 former board members were arrested for conspiracy and embezzlement. The cousin who ran the shell company was picked up in New Mexico and extradited. He confessed within 48 hours, trading testimony for reduced charges. The state froze all remaining HOA funds pending restitution. Residents were given a choice: dissolve the HOA entirely or rebuild it from scratch under court-appointed oversight. They voted overwhelmingly to dissolve. The clubhouse was sold off. The common areas were deeded back to the city under a maintenance sharing program. And for the first time in decades, Willow Ridge was just a neighborhood again. No boards, no fines, no manufactured authority. I thought that would be the end of it. But then I got a letter from the state AG's office, an official notification that I was entitled to victim compensation from the conviction. I declined the money. What I wanted was something else, a public acknowledgement. So the AG's office held a press conference. It wasn't flashy. Just a podium on the courthouse steps, with Dana reading a statement about the investigation's conclusion. "This case is a reminder," she said, "that fraudulent governance, no matter how small scale or hidden behind community rules, is still fraud. It's still theft. And it's still subject to the full weight of the law. She handed me a framed certificate, a formal recognition of my cooperation and documentation that helped dismantle the fraud ring. I didn't care about the frame, but the words mattered. Back at the lake, I built a small dock extension. Not for fishing or launching boats, just a bench at the end, facing the water. I added a plaque to the post beside it. Nothing grand, just a quote etched into steel: "Property isn't power. Truth is." The neighborhood changed after that. People waved more, talked more. A few even asked if they could fish along the bank again. I said yes, with one condition: they ask first, and they always did. The lake was still mine, but it felt more peaceful now. Not because I'd won, but because the illusion of control that had once seeped from across the fence was gone. Cheryl had tried to own something with lies. I'd kept it with facts, and that made all the difference.